He had never liked long bus rides. The passengers were always noisy, the drivers rude, and for some reason, the trip always seemed much longer than if one was to travel the same distance by car. But tonight was different. He was feeling good. They had already been travelling for more than 16 hours since he boarded the bus in Portland, Oregon, and more than 2 hours had passed since they last stopped to stretch their legs and take on new passengers in Whitefish, Montana. Still another 30 hours or so remained before they would arrive in Chicago, the location of his new job. But the bus was nice enough that the time seemed to pass fairly quickly. The seats were soft, and there were relatively few passengers aboard. The dark of night brought yet another perk. He would get to see the sun coming up ahead of them as they rolled eastward down the highway, something that, although a simple thing, would seem absolutely wonderful to this young man on his way to the city that was to be his new home. Outside, everything was pitch black, except for the brightest of the few stars that were visible. Due to the almost stifling warmth inside the bus, the windows were heavily fogged. The lighting along the roadway was spotty, so having a decent view of the landscape was quite a task as well. The only thing he could really see was a reflection of his own tired eyes in the window, and in the distance, the lights of nearby houses. Who could live in a hayseed place like this, he wondered, though he already had the answer. People do what they have to do in order to survive. Following this line of reasoning, a number of different sources of motivation came to mind. Perhaps land or housing in the region was inexpensive, therefore appealing to those who needed to rent or buy a house. Maybe the darkness hid a large factory or two where the locals could work and thus feed their families. He noticed the black silhouettes of large forests of trees could be standing precariously on the tops of the surrounding mountains. There might well be jobs in the lumber industry in the area. Open your eyes, stupid, the traveller said to himself, a habit he'd had since childhood, which had been instilled in him by his doting grandfather. You don't have to think twice to find valid reasons for people to live in this area. It might even be a good idea for him to learn more about the area. It might come in handy someday. "Excuse me," said a timid female voice. It was coming from the seat in front of his. "Would you mind if I turned on my overhead light?" She had some sort of accent. He wasn't sure what. European? The traveller took a deep breath, as silently as he could. Of course he would mind. If the passenger in front of him turned on her light, it would make it even more difficult for him to enjoy the view outside. But the woman was asking kindly enough. She was older, and had boarded the bus at the last stop, in Whitefish. She was probably 50, but dressed and acted 20 years younger. Forcing a smile, he said, "Not at all." "Oh, thank you so much," she said. That said, the woman reached up to turn on the light immediately, the glare almost completely spoiling his view. This frustrated him, and he realised that his effort to come off as polite had struck him as darkly comical. Someone should remind this lady that this is an interstate bus line, and not a limo service, he thought. "You fucking son of a bitch!" bellowed the woman in front of him, her voice now inflated into that of an ogre, and clearly directed at him. He felt the blood run cold in his veins. How could have she known what he was thinking? He wondered if he had mumbled it out aloud, rather than keeping it to himself. That was the only logical explanation. He must have. Why had he been so cynical with this woman initially so gentle? It was an unforgivable thing to have done, and how had her voice morphed into something so huge? He tried to apologise, but before a word could escape his lips, he felt a clammy hand grab his neck and begin to throttle him. Fingernails that resembled claws penetrated his flesh, while his eardrums nearly burst at the sound of what was now an even more massive, demonic voice, seeming to echo in his ears. "You're thinking so loud, even the dead could hear it, you piece of shit." Forcing himself to look forward into the next seat, the traveller caught a glimpse of the creature that was strangling him, and was sorry he tried. It was a grotesque image. The creature had no eyes, no nose, no ears or hair, nothing that could humanise its countenance. Where the face should be, there was only a gigantic mouth, contorted in the most disturbing smile that anyone could imagine, displaying rows of hundreds of tiny, sharp, needle-like teeth. The next moment, he felt his head striking the glass of the window, shattering it, the shards of glass shredding the flesh from the side of his face. After that, he saw only darkness. The traveller awoke with a start. For a minute, he couldn't catch his breath. His heart was beating like a bass drum. His eyes were staring wildly in all directions. He reached up involuntarily and touched the right side of his face in search of any sign of blood. There was none. His trembling hands traced the window in the area where he had seen it shatter. Not even a crack. Had the creature's attack been a dream? Or... Slowly he caught his breath and relaxed a little, even though the bus ride seemed bumpier than usual. "Excuse me," said a softly accented female voice from the seat in front of him. He suddenly felt as if death had come in person to touch him at that moment. He couldn't move a muscle, not even to breathe. His body began to tremble, even more than the bus was shaking. After a moment of silence, the older woman's voice repeated, "Excuse me, sir, would you mind if I turn on my light?" "Oh shit," were the only words that passed through the traveller's mind. With a Herculean effort, he raised his hands and covered his mouth, pressing so hard that his gums nearly bled. "Sir?" The woman's voice carried a small note of impatience now. His reaction was one of panic. "Yes, of course you can. Please, go right ahead." He realised he was practically shouting this at her rather than speaking normally, and it ended up attracting the attention of the other passengers. One of them shouted something back like, "Shut up! I'm trying to sleep, you dumb fuck!" The woman in the seat in the front of him thanked him, but hesitantly, as if confused by his reaction. His eyes widened, and time seemed to slow down. His heartbeat pounded in his ears and lingered for an eternity between one beat and the next. The instant his head hit the window, the glass shattered. Not only the traveller, but all the passengers on the bus, including the woman in the front seat, met a similar fate. Heads struck windows with great force. Bodies fell from one side of the bus to the other. In a nearby seat, a child cried out, and someone in the back was praying quite loudly as it all seemed to swirl together like a human tornado. The bus that previously was merely bumpy now ran a zigzag course, finally sideswiping a large tree and overturning. "Is anyone seriously injured? Are you all okay?" asked the driver. He was a tall, powerfully built man, but he seemed to be struggling to keep on his feet. "Is anyone seriously hurt?" he called out once more. "Here, back here. A woman's bleeding badly. Help us, please." The driver lost his balance while trying to make his way down the side of the bus, now below his feet. He held onto the seat backs, looking for a person calling for help. It was a young woman, a Catholic novitiate, whose white habit was stained a deep red by blood which was pouring from a lacerated scalp. The news crew arrived. 1 killed, 18 hospitalised in bus crash. A Midwest transport bus carrying 27 people veered off the road Tuesday morning while travelling east near Browning, Montana. The bus overturned after leaving the roadway and striking a tree. 1 woman was transported to an area hospital in critical condition. 3 other individuals were reported in serious condition. 3 reported with fractures, while 15 others were treated for cuts and bruises and released.